Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another week of Just Gay Stuff podcast. I am Jess.
And I'm Lauren.
And we just said in the intro, are you ready to rumble?
Yeah, rumble.
Like not rumble, rumble.
Yeah, the rumbles. I'm always ready to rumble.
That's one good thing about like looking forward to Christmas.
Yeah.
Rumbles are where it's at.
Rumbles are where it's at. We had a little argument. Well, not argument. Argument's not the right word.
Did
but
we? Where
had,
are we going?
We had a discussion about desserts. Well, because you mentioned rumble and I was like, do you like those Cocoa Pop Crackle
Oh, no.
things? And you were like, no. And I was like, what?
Yeah, not gross.
Blasphemy.
Anyway, it's great to be back for another week.
Sure is.
Another reminder that we are still up for a Women in Podcasting Award. So if you haven't voted for us, please get onto that if you would like to swing us a vote. We'll put all of the information in the show notes so that you can vote for us. Voting is open until October 1st.
Yeah.
So there's still plenty of time, I think, by the time this episode comes out.
Yeah, heaps of time. The voting stuff is already on our socials and we're constantly promoting on socials. Thank you to those who have already voted for us.
Yes, we are very grateful. And of course, every vote counts. Every listen on the podcast counts. Every follow on social media counts. All of those really fun social media-y things we absolutely appreciate from the bottom of our hearts. So
yeah, and we love getting to connect with you every week.
yeah, absolutely. Well, this week is another week of learning, Lauren.
Oh, strap me in for some education.
Strap you in. Okay.
Strap me.
Well, last week
Gay-education. Gay-education? I don't know.
Gay-education?
Gay-education. I was trying to do a play on words. It didn't work.
Well, last week we talked about the beginning of queer cinema.
Yeah.
And we found out things like what were the first queer characters to ever appear in cinema? What were the first queer kisses? We talked about the Hays Code, which stopped our queer representation and forced queer coding to become representation, and how that unfortunately drove really negative stereotypes to be the only kind of representation that we had. So if you missed last week's episode, definitely go back and have a listen because I think we might reference a few things in this episode.
Okay. I definitely learned a lot in that episode.
Same. And things that I thought I knew a lot about, I really didn't know anything about.
Yeah.
And I think that's society in general. We like to think we know a lot of things and then
we're such know-it-alls, but we know shit all.
Yeah, exactly. So this week, we're going to focus on gay television.
Ooh.
I want to start by saying that the Hays Code also heavily affected gay TV, but we are going to talk about like the firsts of gay TV and the representation and how far that's come in this episode.
Cool.
So we don't have to tell you again why representation is so important, but maybe what I will say to all of our listeners is that the importance of queer characters in television programs, whether it was heavily stereotyped or not, gave the general audience the food for thought that queer people do actually exist and live among us. Now, I want to say that television representation was a bit more important than representation in cinema, and this was because even for characters that were sidelined to the main character, these roles were ongoing for many episodes, and sometimes it spanned years at a time, which means it gave characters time to show backstory, develop, give a sense of normality, which often educated audiences along the way. There was actually a quote from Joe Biden in 2012 when he was the vice president, where the USA were in a bid for marriage equality at that time. He commended the sitcom Will and Grace for providing education to American audiences. He was quoted saying, "I think Will and Grace did more to educate the American public than almost anything anybody has done so far. People fear that which is different, and now they're beginning to understand."
Wow.
And that's so true because as a society, we are so media driven.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
We absorb what we see, and in a world where everything is so accessible, I think it's pretty easy to say that we only understand what we are educated on, and that comes down to anything, not just queer representation and queer culture. But forget about the now.
Ooh.
We're going to take a little trip back. Yeah.
Traveling back in time.
We're going to go all the way back.
Ooh.
We're going to go back to where queer characters began in television.
Wow. I'm excited because I was surprised by queer cinema, how far back that started. So I'm excited for queer television.
Well, television was a bit later. So when the media first started in the way of telling stories on screen, movies were all the rage and they date back pretty far.
Yeah.
Like further than when queer representation in TV dated.
Yeah.
However, Television shows only started hitting the screen as an experiment in 1928.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
The first full-length drama program was called The Queen's Messenger. From there, we started to see the popularity evolve around having shorter programs carrying storylines over a period of time in episodes rather than in a single sitting like a movie.
Wow.
So again, I'm going to put links to all of the articles that I read that I'm sharing this information from, so any of our listeners can go and read them themselves. Yeah, because it's very interesting, and I tried to summarize as best as possible. So as we're talking throughout this episode, there are some things that I might have left out.
Yeah, and if they wanted a more in-depth understanding of what you're talking about.
Absolutely, they can go and read that themselves, which is great.
Love it.
So to go through a bit of a timeline, the 70s was where it was all happening.
Yeah, man.
The first ever gay character in a television program ever was introduced on prime time in 1971. It took 43 years.
Wow.
Like from the beginning of TV programs starting in the 20s to then in the 70s. Now, this was in an American sitcom called All in the Family.
Oh.
Archie Bunker, who was one of the show's main characters, had a drinking buddy at a bar named Steve, and he was an out, openly gay man.
Wow.
The show then continued its representation in small aspects later on. Archie's wife, Edith, had a lesbian cousin who had accidentally passed away, but she'd left her entire estate to her lesbian partner.
Wow.
Which is crazy. In 1972, Australian TV had its first ever gay male character in a soap. The soap was called Number 96 with the character of Don Finlayson, and this ran from 1972 to 1977. We also had our very first gay kiss this year on an ABC documentary series called Checkerboard.
Really? Wow.
So the 70s were where it was at.
I feel like that makes sense to me because the 70s was a very like freeing time, like power to the people, hippie vibes. So no one gave a shit about anything, honestly, at that point in time.
We've also learnt from talking to some of our guests that the 70s was a very positive time for a lot of things. As a TV program, Number 96 is also credited with representing the first transgender character played by Carlotta. You might know the name. She was a very famous trans actress, and in 1973, which was a leap ahead of America, whose first trans character only said to come to the screen in 2006 in a soap opera called All My Children.
Oh my gosh.
So as Aussies, we were quite progressive.
Yeah.
And as you know, Carlotta is a real transgender actress. So for her to play a transgender role in the 70s was a very, very big thing.
Yeah, she was the Australia's first well-known trans actress.
Yeah, it was great.
And the first person to have a transgender reassignment surgery in Australia.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So in 1973, so the same year as Carlotta's character, the reality television show An American Family, which was like how we know the Kardashians to be now.
Oh, okay.
It was a reality show that followed the Loud family. Lance Loud made history when he came out on national television in this reality show.
Wow.
So that was
Loud
for
and
America.
proud.
Yeah, that was
Good
for
on
America.
him.
In 1974, Aussie history was made with the very first lesbian kiss being shown ever in a television program called The Box. However, the BBC apparently disputes this. If you Google it, the BBC will tell you they had the very first lesbian kiss in the same year on their show called Girl. However, we beat their airing date by 2 weeks. So we have the placeholder, but Google still credits BBC.
I was going to say which one of our listeners, because I know we have a few like UK listeners as well. So I was like, which one do you guys think it is?
This is the fight.
We should put up a poll on Instagram. So
yeah. Who do you think
it was first?
Now, for decades at a time, these characters were said to be very minor roles, never major storylines. And in the 90s and 2000s, we started to see a trend emerge that gay and lesbian characters were only included for short storylines at a time, allowing a series to return to regular viewing in case any large audiences were disgruntled by the characters. So they could have peace of mind that it would only be short-lived, which that's so sad, isn't it?
That's really sad. I was going to say, just you reading that out to me, that hurt my soul a little bit. I'm like, oh.
It's like, oh, don't worry, the gay won't last long. We'll go back to normal soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what gets me, right? How does anyone define normal?
Yeah, you can't.
Like, you can't define normal. Normal is different. I'm not even talking about
queer culture
or queer in general. I'm just talking about in like everyday aspect. Your version of normal is different to my version of normal, different to your mother's version of normal. Like
different to all of our listeners' versions of normal.
Like, how do you define that? Who goes, oh, this is normal?
Well, it's like normal life is what's normal to you.
Yeah.
Uniquely. because, you know, we all work different jobs as well. So a normal work week to you might be 9 to 5, Monday to Friday.
Yeah.
A normal work week to me is sporadic hours Thursday to Sunday.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, there are 2 series in particular that made a big splash, and we're talking worldwide here.
Oh.
In 1999, the UK released an absolutely groundbreaking series called Queer as Folk, which followed the lives of 3 gay men. It ran for 8 episodes with a follow-up 2 episodes in the year 2000. Then, American television channel Showtime took on Queer as Folk and produced another series with the same name from the year 2000 onwards, also including queer women into the picture. Showtime also then went on to produce Eileen Schenken's The L Word in 2005, whoop, whoop, which, as we know, is a massive staple in so many lives.
Yeah.
The closest we got in Australia to an ensemble of queer characters was in Prisoner, which had 6 queer characters in its running time of 1979 to 1986.
That's fun. We were just talking about Prisoner before and we were like, oh, little fun fact. Someone that was in Prisoner lives up the road or something.
Yeah, lives over on Coochie, I think.
Coochie. And
one of the islands.
Yeah.
So not far.
And my nan went to school with one of the girls that plays in Prisoner as well. So it's so funny.
6 degrees of separation.
Small world.
Especially between lesbians.
I don't think I've ever watched... I don't think I've ever watched Queer as Folk.
I never watched Queer as Folk, but, you know, dedicated L Word fan here.
Yeah, same.
Which I have to say we have talked about doing another episode where we actually kind of pull apart some of the L Word episodes because, as we know, looking back now, there are a few things that are actually quite...
very toxic.
Yeah. And we should pull apart some of those toxic relationships.
So. I think that'll be a separate one. But now that we've delved into the world of queer cinema and queer TV, I think we're more able to be open to that now.
Plus, we're on our way talking about all these things. We're on our way,
yeah.
So I don't think we need to get into why those kinds of shows were groundbreaking, except for the fact that it gave a sense of normality for those living in queer relationships or for those suspecting that they might actually be queer. It showed that you could live a fulfilling life regardless of the fictional drama, and even more so that this was important, especially for gay men after the AIDS pandemic in the 80s. So we've spoken to a number of people now who either lived through the AIDS crisis or spoke on how the AIDS crisis really affected everyone. So to have representation on television with storylines with queer people as main characters, it really meant a lot to people to not be tucked away or sidelined. But obviously, these particular shows weren't the catalyst for change in every program.
Yeah.
Like, one thing is never going to change the rest of television.
No, it's not. But I think it's still important, as we've said, to have that representation.
Absolutely.
There. And from that, it's allowed the reality versions of shows. And, you know, we've also been fortunate enough to talk to said stars of those shows as well.
Yeah. So we're going to focus heavily on Australian television for a bit.
Okay.
Because while the American and the British side of things are very important to queer culture as a whole, I really wanted to focus this episode on like how far we've come in Australian TV.
Yeah.
So a study in Australian television between the years 2000 and 2019 showed 44 series including gay men and 38 series including lesbian women.
See, to me, those numbers technically would sound like a lot, but they're not actually a lot in a scope of things.
Well, in a 9-year period, you think about how many TV shows probably did emerge, and it was probably in the hundreds.
Yeah.
And there's less than 100 characters there.
Yeah, that's mental. And it's characters. It's not even just the full show.
Exactly. So the majority of storylines focused on the coming out experience for a gay man and the passing lesbian phase for a gay woman, which also then played a hand in bi-erasure on television, because bisexuality, we know for men, is hardly ever spoken about.
Yeah.
But for women, the passing lesbian phase was always the main crux of the story, and the possibility of characters' bisexuality was simply just unwritten or deemed not interesting enough. Which I have to say, in turn, we do see that in society, people expect you to still be one thing or another.
Yeah.
And not to be open to the possibility of just finding love with a person regardless of their gender.
Yeah.
And I know personally, I've faced this when friends of mine or women that I've dated have dated women and then dated men. And there's always a comment from someone I know that's like, oh, are they straight now?
Yeah.
I can count multiple times on my hands how many times that's been said to me.
It doesn't erase their bisexuality, and yeah, that's the whole thing that we're talking about. they can still be queer, they can still be bi.
They can just like who they like,
can just like who they like. Just because they like a girl doesn't make them gay. Just because they like a boy doesn't make them straight. Like,
And I think we said in our episode with Ali Morgan
yeah.
how you can be a bisexual woman married to a man and still be bisexual and not be considered straight.
Yeah.
Just because your relationship reflects a straight sexuality doesn't actually mean that's who you are.
Yeah, exactly.
So along with bisexuality not being visible on television, there was also an avoidance of homosexual intimacy shown on TV. One thing that I like to talk about all the time is something that my friends and I have patented as straight kissage.
Oh.
Have we spoken about it
I
before?
think we have.
So
straight kissage.
let me explain what this is.
Okay.
You can see this in any television show depicting gay characters, and on that show where they're avoiding intimacy, it's really clear that the actors or actresses don't actually want to kiss each other.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So straight kissage is like very closed mouth kissing. Yeah.
How do you do it?
Yeah, like that. For anyone not watching the video, we just did a little demonstration. Yeah, so
That's terrible.
very closed mouth kissing. It really doesn't sell any kind of desire or intimacy, and it's really not selling the relationship to the audience. So there's many shows that this happens in, and look, maybe it happens between straight actors too, because I know in How I Met Your Mother, there was that big thing between Lily and Marshall and how he was a smoker and she hated kissing him because he always stunk like tobacco.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it happens between straight actors as well, but I've always had this really big annoyance from when two actors don't look like they're actually into each other and they're trying to sell romance.
Do you think that's because up until recently they were hiring straight actors to play gay characters?
Yeah. And I think that and this might be something that we talk about in another episode as well, but there was always that fear from actors that they would be typecast if they played those characters too well. So notable series on our Aussie shores that gave visibility to gay characters was in Blue Heelers in 2003. In a particular episode, it depicted a custody battle between a lesbian couple, which gave focus to same-sex IVF and adoption, and reflected the legalities around this issue in Australia at that time. And then again in the hospital drama All Saints with one particular doctor, Charlotte Beaumont, played by Tammy McIntosh. She was completely written as a lesbian character, but then later became a bisexual woman, which was a storyline that was explored after she became pregnant after having relations with a man.
Oh.
So they didn't erase her queerness. They kind of brought bisexuality to the front, which was better than erasing it entirely.
That's true.
So as you can believe, after years of very fragmented queer storylines, these were quite a big deal. And even though the visibility of same-sex families on Blue Heelers was huge, it only lasted for a single episode.
Yeah.
Now, I want to move on to representation of trans and non-binary people on television. And remember, we're still talking about Australia here. So there have been 11 series in total that included trans or non-binary characters. And only one of these series was before the year 2010.
What?
And it was the soap opera Number 96, which we briefly mentioned before with Carlotta.
Yeah, wow.
Now, as a show altogether, Number 96 offered a lot for queer representation in the way of having a gay character, a lesbian character, the trans character with Carlotta. But apart from their storylines, it was said that while Carlotta's trans character of Robin was taken very seriously, her storyline was also very intended to be quite scandalous and made only to shock the audience, which apparently was when her boyfriend found out that she was actually a man. And so then Australian audiences had to deal with that. And you can imagine that wasn't probably very positive.
Received very well. I think we discussed that a little bit in the queer cinema episode of how it went from that queer coding and queer stuff to like, it was either portrayed in a negative way or portrayed to be shocking in a way.
And how we said queer representation doesn't necessarily mean it's positive queer representation.
No, and that's terrible. That's sad.
From here, we have grown, and some notable series after 2010 to mention have been Foxtel's Wentworth with the character of Reb and many other queer characters, Foxtel's miniseries Secret Cities, and Carlotta the TV movie, all about Carlotta herself.
Yeah.
So from 2018 onwards, we seem to cross another big hurdle in our storytelling of queer characters, which saw us creating queer communities on screen.
Oh.
Our queer storylines were now not boiled down to one single character living in a heterosexual world, but more so exploring what Showtime had done years prior with the L Word and Queer as Folk, where queer people could live openly amongst other queer people, which, let's face it, is the reality of our lives. You know, we aren't single to ourselves. We do have queer friends and we all go to queer places, you know.
Yeah.
Australian show Outland was actually the start of this on our shores in 2012.
Really?
But the popularity of this and truth of this reality is now seen in regular TV soaps like Neighbours, again with Wentworth and plenty of others. Between the years of 2016 and 2021, Australian representation of queer characters was actually 69%. And the really positive thing is that these shows are starting to represent queer characters truthfully and not just for the negative-fueled scandalous storylines. It's also important to mention that after 2018, a lot of the trans characters that we see on television are actually played by trans actors, which is kind of what we said before.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm glad that we've made it a bit more progressive in the television industry.
And obviously that's not singular to Australia, that's worldwide.
Yeah, worldwide.
Because there are a few trans characters that I can think of now that we know are played by trans actors, like even, you know, Elliot Page in Umbrella Academy, and how beautifully they wrote him in as trans.
Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely great. So there's still another topic of discussion for queer characters that we're definitely going to have to address in a future episode, because we're not going to be able to cover it in this one. It's going to be an
episode on itself.
Yeah, and this is the lesbian death trope.
Yeah, and I had never heard about it until we started doing this podcast, and you were like, "Oh, what about the lesbian death trope?" I'm like, "What?"
Yeah, I've been
talking
about
my little baby gayanism.
I've been talking about doing this as a topic for a while, and we see this a lot more in American television, I find.
Yeah.
And while some of the American dates were important for the first part of this episode, I really did want to focus on Australia. So that's why we'll bring lesbian death trope in as a separate episode, because there's a lot to unpack there. And I know that everybody who has been a part of seeing how the Trevor Project has come up in America and a lot of the television shows, particularly on the CW network, we will get into the death trope because it's actually quite sad and very negative.
Yeah.
So we've gone through a lot of information. I hope no one's brain is on fire. I think that mine is.
Your brain's always on fire.
I know, I'm getting sweaty. It's hot in here.
That's why your hair's red.
Yeah, I'm a matchstick, we said.
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought to end this episode, I really just want to name a few of the iconic Australian characters that are memorable to me over the years. And then I'm going to ask you if you have any.
Oh, pressure.
So firstly, for me, Wentworth was definitely a big one. Frankie was one of my utmost favourite characters, and I do have to pay tribute to my best friend for making me watch Wentworth because she hounded the shit out of me until I actually watched it, and then, of course, I fell in love. So, Frankie on that. Other characters to mention on there was the story arc between Ali and B. Maxine was a transgender character.
Really?
Not played by a transgender actor, but still the representation was there, which I think was really important.
Do you know, I've never actually seen Wentworth.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God, we have to watch it.
Yeah.
You will love it.
I
You will
know.
love it. Anybody who hasn't seen Wentworth, you will love it.
It's funny because I've seen like the OG Prisoners, but I haven't watched Wentworth.
No, heed the message that I got from my best friend. You have to watch Wentworth.
Okay.
So to roll on, one of our guests, Mark Trevorrow, who played out character Daryl in The Suit Shop on Kath and Kim.
Yeah.
And of course, Magda Zabansky's character of Sharon, who was immensely queer-coded for years.
Super queer-coded.
Up until the movie Kath and Kim Dorella, they used very clever writing to tease the outing of her character. And then in that movie, it was kind of more forwardly said that, you know, she had some queer tendencies.
Yeah.
Also, I think Kel rates a mention here because he is so queer-coded.
Oh, super queer-coded. He
And
does even mention it.
Yeah, I love how he so openly and normally, plainly tells Kath that he was in the Navy for 6 years, which, you know, meaning he had some same-sex relationships.
Yeah.
Flying over to reality TV,
Oh.
another guest of ours, Farmer Dave from Big Brother, as well as Tully from another season.
Yeah.
I remember feeling very excited to see a real woman on reality TV who was currently in a relationship with another woman.
Same. I loved watching Tully.
Yeah. And I know that was a bit of a toxic thing that happened. There's things there.
Things, drama. We don't get into that.
Look, I think in those times, those were the characters or the people that really affected me. And I'm sure there are plenty more. But do you have any iconic Aussie characters?
Oh, I know we were talking about TV shows, and for me, it's a bit baffling because I can't really think in terms of Aussie TV. But for me, something that comes to mind, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
Oh, yeah.
And Guy Pearce. Yeah.
A massive Aussie film.
Aussie film that portrays 3 drag queens. So that's probably my first piece of queer Australian television cinema.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And then most recently, you were talking about Heartbreak High.
Oh, yeah. Heartbreak High. I like Heartbreak High. I know that Heartbreak High is a reinvention of an old Australian television sitcom of the same name. But I think the way that they've done Heartbreak High is very valuable and great for representation because it has queer characters, but it's not in your face.
Yeah.
It's not over wokeness or the overdoneness. It's like, oh, these are just high school students trying to live their life. Yeah, there's all the bullshit that goes on in high school, but who cares if they're gay or whatever?
And like we said before, some of that over wokeness can have a negative effect on our community, as well as the audience that are still willing and trying to understand us as a community and our culture.
Yeah.
So that's a really good mentions. And I'm sure there's plenty more. So if you have any Australian queer characters that you...
Please tell us.
Yeah, please tell us the ones that we've forgotten. Another one worth mentioning, I think, would have to be Barry Humphries as Dame Edna Everage.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they kind of brought drag to the forefront of Australian television.
It's very true.
And I guess got audiences ready to see that on TV. And in reality, queer culture as well, have to mention Courtney Act.
Oh, yeah.
Duh. So if anyone has any other queer characters on Australian TV that were iconic or pivotal moments, please let us know.
Yeah, please let us know, because as much as we are learning about these characters in real time, the representation and educating you guys can also educate us.
Absolutely.
We know, like, oh.
So we have a couple of different episodes coming up in the next few weeks that we hope everyone enjoys, but we hope that you have enjoyed listening to our timelines of queer cinema and of queer television, and that you took something away from it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hope that you learned something, because I definitely did.
No, I definitely did. And I think mostly learning where characters came from, how we portrayed them, how it was negative or positive, and maybe you're sitting there listening to this episode thinking of characters in your own way now.
Yeah.
And thinking back to, wow, was that actually positive portrayal, even though I loved it because I saw it and it was representation? Or was it actually quite negative?
Yeah, or the fact that sometimes you didn't realize a character was queer coded and now you're like, oh, hang on a minute.
Yeah. And this was our focus on Australian TV. We might do a focus on other American shows and things that really were staples in childhoods. And I think we'll probably do that in Lesbian Death Trope.
Probably.
But one to mention was the Joe Biden quote, which was Will and Grace. That did a lot for American television and Australian television.
I was surprised that came from Joe Biden.
I know. Yeah. Weird. I mean, he was supportive in the bid for marriage equality as far as we know. I'm not going to get into politics because I admit that I don't know enough about it.
No.
But yeah, until next week, I guess you should
remember to stay gay, motherfuckers.
I'm talking about, you're talking about, we're talking about just gay stuff.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Just Gay Stuff. Make sure to follow us at Just Gay Stuff Podcast on all your socials and write to us with your stories at justgaystuffpodcast@gmail.com.